actually was one historically that we asked all parents to watch prior to a visit to the field. So I think it's a fantastic, all-around, all-encompassing kind of webinar that talks about the things, it gives you some foundation in the kinds of things that we're working with your children, and that gives you a background so that when you walk into either picking up your child or going to a field visit, that you really have the basics down. I think it can be one that you watch at any point in time. I think it could be one that you watch early on in your time at Evoke. I think it also could be one that you watch later on. This is one that we gave for years live when people would come out to the program. This is one that I've presented on 200 or 300 times at least. So with that preamble, let me get right into it, and I'll tell you some of the stories and some examples from some of those meetings that we held. I always started off with this idea. It's very similar to the idea of radical acceptance that I talk about in my book and that I talk about at our parent meetings nowadays, is this idea that the challenge that comes, the greatest challenge in parenting is to focus on changing yourself and not your teenager. And I think that's hard to hold on to. I think at times we can get it. It resonates with us, but it's hard to hold on to, especially when our children are in crisis or they're exhibiting behaviors or symptoms that are very, very dangerous or very acute. It can be very hard. But it is the foundation of all we think about. It is the foundation of most parent education. I would often start off, like I'm going to tonight, with this quote from a man by the name of Henry T. Close. That I've tracked down the original quote. I don't know who Henry T. Close is because there was no context for it, but it was in an old book that we found. Part of it's in my book, but there's more to it than is in my book, and I call it the perfect parent. There is no question that our parents failed us as parents. All parents fail their children, and ours were no exception. No parent is ever adequate enough for the job of being a parent, and there's no way not to fail at it. No parent ever has enough love or wisdom or maturity or patience. No parent ever succeeds completely. As kids, we needed more mothering than our mothers could give us, and more fathering than our fathers had to offer. More brothering and sistering than we got from our siblings. Part of our task in growing us thus becomes finding our own sources of parenting to add to what our parents and what our mothers and fathers were not able to give us. We cannot wait for our parents' permission to grow up. We need to decide on our own to find other people to parent us, to find other people to give us what our parents couldn't. To grow up isn't easy, but in order to do that, we must forgive our parents. We must forgive them for our sakes, not theirs. When we do not forgive them, we are still expecting all of our parenting from them. We are clinging to them, that in the hope that if we wait long enough or do enough of the right things or make them feel guilty enough, they will kindly come through with enough parenting for us. But this is impossible. And in order for us to be really free to find other sources of parenting, we must forgive. So I would often read this quote, and then I would ask for people impressions. And I'm going to share with you various questions, comments, reactions that I would get over the years. A lot of people would feel first and foremost offensive, especially when it starts off, this idea that they were good enough or did the best they could. Some of them would even go back to thinking about their parents, talking about their parents as their parents were great parents, pretty great parents. But you'll notice some of the language, it's about that nobody's perfect. And the goal of the reading of this, actually, and many people had this reaction, was a liberating effect. This idea that we can get it right or perfect, and that if we do everything perfect or press enough of the right buttons, that we'll get the outcome that we want. So in a way, it's an idea to liberate us. It's also an invitation to go back and do your own work with your own parents, to explore the wounds, the issues, the rules, the roles that were in your family. It's only with that understanding that we can most effectively parent our own children. When we evaluate our past, when we go over it, when we are able to see our childhood very clearly, we then create a foundation where we can see our children clearly. Oftentimes, we end up, in our parenting mistakes, we end up parenting our children, and really what we're trying to do is we're trying to repair our own wounds, to give our children what we didn't have. And so the grieving process of our own childhood allows us to let go of that and then to position ourselves more effectively to be able to see our children and what they need instead of trying to parent ourselves, our own inner child in the person of our parents. So those are a couple of the examples. The last idea that I would offer to you is this idea that this line that children, when they grow up, will forgive their parents. They need to forgive their parents, not for their parents' sake, but for their own sake. That's a part of healthy growing up. And even in cases, and this is by far the exception to the rule at Evoke, even in cases of abuse, significant or acute abuse, it still is part of the healing process to move past and forgive and let go of your parents. So for most of us who are good enough parents, right, that's a clinical term actually, where we're imperfect and we make mistakes, this needs to apply to us. So sorting out our own relationship with our parents, learning to forgive them, learning to forgive ourselves, allows us to be more present with our children. If I haven't forgiven myself as a parent, if I haven't forgiven my parents, then I'm going to be trying to repair something that already happened. I'm going to be parenting with a mindset of getting my child to be grateful for me, to appreciate me, and then I'm not really doing for the child, I'm asking them to do for me. So this idea, this elusive concept of the perfect parent, is to liberate us from the idea that we can get it right. So the starting point, it's this idea. Consider the possibility that you're on course. At least in these little moments of time when you're with me, when you're reading our literature, when you're reading the book, when you're watching these webinars, consider for just a moment that you're not off course, that this is not a detour, that this is actually something that is perfectly suited for what you need to learn in your life right now. And when you can embrace the journey, when you can embrace the now, the what is happening, you also get access to the wisdom, to the treasures, to the gold that story has to offer. If we spend our time in the I should be somewhere else, or this shouldn't be happening, or most commonly it's spoken as, why is this happening to me? When we spend our time in those places psychologically, we don't also get the wisdom, the strength, the resources, the amazing richness that this part of the journey has to offer. I tell the story about this parent. I was sitting in a transition meeting with a parent, and she was describing being at home with her son. She was describing having him leave before the end of the football season. He played on the varsity football team, and she attended the last homecoming, the last game of the year, the homecoming game, or excuse me, the last game of the year. And there was a ceremony for all of the mothers where they were given a blanket with their son's number on it and the letter and a rose. And she watched all these mothers going down, receiving this gift of appreciation for all the sacrifices that these mothers had made, and for their sons giving it to them on the 50-yard line. And she said, I expected her to go to a place of grief, to talk about how that was a big loss for her. But she ended her story with, I felt so sorry for all the other parents that they weren't getting to have the experiences that I was having with my son while he was in the wilderness with you. And so it's that idea that this part of our lives has so much to offer. We would not prescribe it for others. We would not wish it on somebody else. But those of you who have been in it a long time realize in the end, it's taught you some things you could not have learned any other way. It's given you a richness. And when we can make meaning out of our suffering, when we can make meaning out of the trauma in our life, both our own childhood and also the experience in our family with our children, when we make meaning of it, it ceases to become suffering. But then we stop trying to constantly guard against trauma. We're not hypervigilant. We're not constantly in a panic trying to control things, because what we know because of that past, because we've made meaning of it, is that if something difficult happens again, we'll be okay with it. We'll make meaning out of it. And then it'll be another part of our journey. Doesn't make it painless, but it makes it bearable. Doesn't make it not hurt, but it gives it value. And it changes our relationship to the here and now, to the present, to the future. I talk about this idea of being an idiot parent. Sometimes the students would say to me, they would accuse their parents of being an idiot, and they would use various words, or maybe even accuse me of being an idiot. And I would often agree with them, and I'd say, sure, your parents are idiots. I've long ago given up this idea, this role of being a detective to find out who was at most fault. So let's just assume, for the sake of discussion, that your parents are idiots. And so are you. And so am I. And so are your friends and your teachers and your peers around you. Life is going to be full of idiots, full of human beings. That's what I really mean by that. who make mistakes, who hurt you, who can't be everything for you. And so life becomes about how to deal with people, how to deal with others in your life. And when you embrace this idea of the idiot parent, when you embrace this idea that I'm human and fallible, when you can become okay enough with yourself to do that. I talk a lot lately about asking parents at an initial meeting that I have with them to go back to your child, to find, say to your child, I just met with a parent coach, I just met with a therapist, and I realized that I've been making lots of mistakes, and come up with a couple examples. Issues about control, issues about lecturing or guilting, whatever it is. Find something in your past. Find the confidence, find the courage to show up this way. And don't worry about whether or not your child's going to use that against you. They can't if you're okay with yourself. They can't if you've forgiven yourself, because you're not asking for something from them. So that's the concept of being an idiot parent. I talk about this idea about what can you control. I use this analogy, or this question. I ask parents, who's in charge of you getting a raise at work? Your boss or you? I usually ask it by raise of hands. Raise your hand if you think your boss is in charge of you getting a raise at work, or raise your hand if you think you're in charge of getting a raise at work. And most people, not all of them, but most people would raise their hand when they said they were in charge of it. And then I would simply follow up with, is it possible to be a fantastic employee and not get a raise, in fact, get laid off even? And people would, of course, agree and nod, because that's an obvious question. And then I would say, is it possible to not be that great of an employee and get lots of raises? That's a little bit harder to imagine, but we can imagine bosses who reward favorites, even family members, where there's other political ideas where even the boss is maybe incompetent in some ways. And so the answer is yes, of course. So we can't control what our boss does. What we can do is we can control coming to work on time, doing our job well, showing up honestly, with integrity, with a skill set, developing our skills, whatever it is that job requires. We can control all of those things, but most of us have become so effective at manipulating our surroundings, manipulating people, getting what we want. But it's a skill, it's an asset that we have. We're effective at it, that we forget fundamentally that we're not in charge of anybody else's decision. We're only in charge about how we show up. And that is, in a sense, a fundamental shift that we ask parents to make. This idea from controlling others to controlling yourself, focusing on yourself. And in the person of your child, if you show up believing that I can control you, your child then responds to that idea, that objectification, that they're being treated like an object, oftentimes with resistance, right? In order to differentiate from you, to separate from you, they go against you. And we all know about that. We all can remind ourselves of examples of that in our own lives. So the job is to kind of find your child's story. It's our job to help find the story too. And in finding their story, find out what their story is asking of their environment, is asking of you, is asking of loved ones. This is what we call diagnoses and prognoses and recommendations, or finding the story. And developing a level of serenity in you, a level of curiosity, a level of awareness, a level of capability to be present with them, that you become their first call. I've been using that language lately, that you want to be their first call. You want to be a resource for them. But in order to do that, you've got to manage your emotions, you've got to deal with them, you've got to sort them out somewhere else. You've got to look in your past, make sense out of it, and find out how it's showing up and affecting today. You've got to go to other places like webinars and self-help groups and therapy to take care of yourself, so that you can then be there for your child. I talk about this idea that parents typically, in most cases, they win their award for loving their children the most. It doesn't necessarily mean that they see them most clearly. In some ways, you would have a vantage point to see my child at times more clearly than I could. It's not about my clinical training. It's just that I'm in it. I'm in the forest, and it's hard to see the trees when you're in the forest. That old analogy. So sometimes taking a step back is the best way to be able to see something, and that's part of what happens when your child enters a vote. The next phase of the meeting is to talk about, I usually ask the question, what are the needs? What are needs that human beings have? And people will begin to identify food, water, shelter needs. They'll often go on to higher level needs like love and belonging and guidance, purpose, confidence, connection, fun, those types of things. And this list could go to be quite large. And I would end the discussion or insert in the discussion the question about what is pain? Is pain a need we have? Something that we need. There's a book called Pain, the Gift That Nobody Wants. One of the stories in it tells about a young baby who basically has no ability to feel pain, is born without the ability to feel pain. Right? He chews the end of his fingers off, plays with the blood that comes out of them, constantly injures himself, ends up with hospital visit, emergency room visit after emergency room visit, and ends up dying at a fairly young age. Not from the disorder itself, not from the numbness itself, but from all the injuries and the complications that come from not being able to feel pain. So we know in a physical sense that pain is a necessity. But so often in our life, we treat pain, not just our children, we treat pain as something to be avoided. In parents, it looks like mistakes or setbacks, failures, right? Feelings that come along with those things. And we try to anesthetize those, try to numb or distract or run away from those. Therapy, on the other hand, is a redirection to pain, to feeling. It's not the goal of therapy to inflict pain, but it's a goal to help somebody feel all of their feelings. Because if you block the negative feelings, you also block the positive feelings to which they are linked. And then that's what depression looks like, denial looks like. It looks like a lack of vitality. There's this model that we've developed. It's a very general model that most therapy rests on to some degree. There are various tenets and specifics to each therapeutic model, each psychotherapy approach, but this is a very common concept in therapy. So it starts off with this contentment, right? At any moment in time, there's a contentment, a neutral starting point. There are desired experiences, and with those desired experiences, there are positive emotions. Joy, happiness, love, peace, hope, gratitude, and so forth. And of course, there are undesired experiences that happen to all of us. Divorce, death of a parent, sexual abuse, rejection, criticism, bullying, learning difficulties, feeling ostracized, those kinds of things, physical abuse. And then with those undesired experiences come undesired emotions: anger, hurt, grief, fear, guilt, hopelessness, sadness, right? All of that. And you follow that down, and what you have is you have this core of feeling, and then you have all these things that we employ around it to cover up or to escape the feeling. Disordered eating, lying, sexual promiscuity, suicidality, defiant behaviors, stealing, drug abuse, substance abuse, so forth and so on. Right? We have all of those things that we use to escape feeling. And we think, because immediately they make it feel better, that that's going to help the problem, and it actually creates more. And then often through an intervention like this, or at some point in time, maybe we're self-motivated and we answer that whisper, that call. We try to get help. And in getting help, we're asked to tell our stories. We're asked to talk about what has gone on with us. And the best way to say it, it's kind of like when a therapist says, tell me about it, what they're saying is, feel. Let's go through a process where you can feel. And then through the telling of the story, through the talking of it, and through the feeling of it, there's a sense of integration and wholeness. Doesn't get fixed, doesn't make it go away, but it fits. Makes sense, it becomes a part of us. We look back on our life's events, the hard ones, and we think, I wouldn't want that, I wouldn't wish that on a friend, somebody that I care about. And there's something that came out of it that's more worthwhile. Most of us can relate to it, and that's the same process that our children are going through. In psychology, they talk about the idea of attempted solutions. That these symptoms, the school refusal, the electronics addiction, the violence, These symptoms are our best attempt to solve the problem. They're called attempted solutions. So we have to change our perspective with pain, both as children, as people, as adults, but also as parents. That pain is not something to be avoided. And oftentimes it's just about getting out of the way, just providing a safe space for it to be. I tell the story in the book about Adam sitting in the rain after being kicked out of a group because he was being aggressive with his peers, verbally aggressive. And after he sat on a fence and I walked over, I had the perception that something else was going on. And Adam started talking about one of his parents who had passed away. And he started to cry and tell me the story and tell me how it felt. And I realized at that moment, more profoundly than I ever had before, I had no solution to that. I had no look on the bright side or think about it this way. No silver lining to point at. I just sat there and cried with Adam. And all I could offer him is my presence. He wasn't alone in his pain. I was with him. It takes a capacity for empathic misery. Right? This is where I came to the realization that I thought I was coming into therapy to make people happy, and I was just coming to therapy to make people feel, help them to feel. And through this process, we integrate. Through this process, we develop resilience. You know, there's the idea that old adage of teaching somebody how to fish. Parents will often say, was it the divorce? Was it his father? Was it his mother? You know, was it her sexual abuse? Was it her learning disorder? What was it? And part of our answer is, you know, we're pretty good. We're pretty good at fishing. So we look at the usual places. We look at adoption. We look at parental discord. We look at abuse. We look at all those places. But really what we're trying to teach people to do is how to fish themselves so that they can answer those questions. Because for many people that we serve, most of the hardest things in their life haven't happened yet. Some that's not true, of course, but for many of them. Regardless, it's really the job about learning how to feel. That's really what we're doing. We're teaching people how to feel. After reading an impact letter, that's what we used to call it, at least. Now it's called the hopes and intentions letter, where a mother and a stepfather had written to a young man. And afterwards, we asked him how he felt, what it was like for him, and he said, you know, with regards to my stepdad, you know, I wish he was here. He deserves to be here more than I do. He sells drugs. He sells marijuana. He smokes marijuana himself. There was no mention of that in this letter, the young man pointed out. And I responded with, well, I wish your mother could be here too. It'd be good for her too. And he looked at me as plain as day and he said, no, Brad, my mother's not bad. She's just sad. And then I heard it. This young man, Bobby was his name, something like that, was saying that this program is for bad people. And I realized that he misunderstood the whole premise, the whole concept, the whole context of therapy and wilderness therapy. This is not a program for bad people. This is a program for people that are hurting. When I would talk to my young children before I could really explain therapy, I'm not sure I can explain it to them all that well right now. But what I would say is I'm working with the sad boys and girls. And I'm helping them with their sadness. That's the simplest, most general way. Now let's bring it to the next phase of the curriculum. Let's talk about communication and make this connection between this idea of healing and telling your story and communication. First of all, we talk about the continuum of communication from passive to aggressive. And sometimes people will talk about passive aggressive. In passive nonverbal, it's things like silence, running, avoiding self-harm, eating drugs, computer isolation. These are passive nonverbal. Failing school, workaholism, sexual promiscuity, stealing, poor hygiene. I would often start off this part of the exercise. I would ask people for examples in each category about things that we do. Things that we do that are passive, nonverbal communication. And I would get the list. I would go with all four of them. In the passive verbal category, poor me, I don't know, I don't care, whatever. Suicide threats, blaming, you messages, humor, lying. In the aggressive verbal category, we would talk about swearing, yelling, threats, sarcasm, name calling, lying. In the aggressive nonverbal, we talk about posturing, physical violence, stealing, suicide, intimidating dress, to try to look intimidating and scary, property destruction, gang membership. So I would do this exercise. This would take about 15 or 20 minutes, asking for additions to these categories. And I will tell you, in the over 250 times I ran this, never one time did a parent offer workaholism. Because even though I said over and over again, let's give some examples of things that we do that fall into this category, I would be very clear about that, things that we do. Parents would often think about what their children are doing. It was just automatic. Even though the language, the question was, give some examples of what we do, very few of them would ever answer with what we do. And the reason I bring up workaholism as an example that never came up in over 250 meetings was that no parent really accused their children, rarely, if ever, accused their children of being workaholics, of working too much. So it's both instructive to kind of lay out what kind of communication, set the ground for assertive communication, but also was a reminder that if our focus becomes on our child and their problems, we lose the target. We lose the most effective approach, the most effective focus. So after going through the communication continuum, I would talk about the I feel statements. I'm not going to go over that at length tonight, but the I feel statement is an assertive way of talking about your feelings, your thoughts. I would give examples of I feel and share an emotion when, given an event, I feel this way because I think, and in the future I hope for something I can control and something I can't control. And then I would teach parents about how to listen, how to effectively practice reflective listening. And if you respond with a solution, a look on the bright side speech, anything other than listening, you're at an extraordinary risk of trying to tell the child not to feel. Think of it this way, or let me explain what was really going on. Or maybe if you try this with your teacher or your friends, or your friends are just jealous, right? Don't be hurt, they're just jealous of you. Most of what we say that interrupts listening sends the implicit message of don't feel what you're feeling. It's irrational, it's crazy, it's uninsightful, it's unenlightened, it's unaware. So feel something different. So we would talk about and teach about how to learn. And a lot of parents would come back with questions around, but what does that really do? Is that enough? We'd practice it, and then they would get the skill down, and they would turn to me and say, but this doesn't solve anything. So then I would talk about and teach about this. I'm going to talk about boundaries in the couple of the original theorists in family therapy. Salvador Minuchin, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic, worked with people with diabetes and eating disorders. And what he developed was what we call structural family therapy. And he was one to articulate in his book, Structural Family Therapy, boundaries. And he talked about them on a continuum, from enmeshment, which is too close, to disengage at the other end, right? Unresponsive, uncaring, unfeeling. And then he said somewhere in the middle is clarity or clear boundaries. And they are illustrated by the dotted line for enmeshment, the dashed line for clear boundaries, and the solid line for disengagement, describing the continuum of emotional intimacy, of proximity. Then Murray Bowen came along and he said something quite different, fundamentally. He said fusion, which is similar to enmeshment, and cutoff, which is similar to Minuchin's idea of disengage, are at one end of the continuum. While they are stylistically different, this, holding my hands far apart from each other, and this, my hands clasped together, are different stylistically, but they're fundamentally a lack of differentiation, a lack of clarity about self and others. I had a young woman years ago worried about telling her father some of her truth around alcohol as she was finishing up the program. And I said, your father sounds really fragile, like you're afraid that he's going to shut down and walk away. And she's like, fragile? What are you talking about? My dad is a rock. My dad is an unfeeling tin can. He's the least fragile. And I said, it looks tough, but that running away, that shutting down, that walking away is really a fragileness, a fragility. And so again, while stylistically it can look differently, it's the opposite of flexible, competent, capacity, open, and so forth. So this idea of healthy detachment is not about distance. It's about healthy attachment. The first ingredient in intimacy is two whole selves. And so going back to the I feel statement, it's not that the skill fixes everything. It's not that you use the skill, you insert it into your life, and all of a sudden all of your relationships are healthy. But it shows you what a healthy relationship would look like. This is how I feel. This is what's going on for me. This is my background, my belief system. This is what I hope that I can't control. This is what I hope that I can control. I don't use it to coerce you. That's why I've said lately, I'm coming, the decades that I've been doing this, I'm coming more and more to the point where I think there's very little value in a parent sharing their feelings with their child. Mostly because the parent is, in essence, handing the child their feelings and hoping the child will take care of them. Stop doing what you're doing so I'm not worried, so I'm not sad, so I'm not hurt or upset. That's not really conducive to healthy child development. It is in Minuchin's and Bowen's model, enmeshment and fusion. It's a lack of separation. But when you show up and say, this is what I feel, this is just mine, it's okay. When you are anxious, when you're upset, I like when parents say to their children, this is not about you. You don't need to change anything for this. But this is what's going on for me. And I'm going to go take care of myself by doing X, by taking a time out, by going on a walk, by talking to somebody else, right? But many of us fall into the trap, and it's a critical trap of trying to tell people how we feel so that they will take care of it. Gandhi said it this way. This is from a book by James Hollis called The Eden Project. Gandhi once remarked, I've been sharing this quote lately, I love this quote, "A coward is incapable of exhibiting love. It is the prerogative of the brave. Projection, fusion, going home is easy. Loving another's otherness is heroic. If we really love the other as other, we have heroically taken on the responsibility for our own individuation, our own journey. And this heroism may properly be called love." So really the sum total of what I'm talking about tonight is making your life a project, right? Getting to a place where the child is not the project, but you are the project. And out of that place, out of that personal work, personal growth, personal awareness, skill development, you'll provide a more optimal environment for your child. Not direct cause and effect, but more optimal, more helpful, more supportive. I think, like I talked about, the examples that I've used is a new staff member asking the students, well, asking to circle up the students because he wanted to share with them some of his frustration because they were walking all over this special kind of soil that is the building block for life in the desert. And I said, why do you want to share your feelings? He said, because I'd like them to stop. I'd like them to follow the rule, which is walk in single file between the sleeping area and the eating area, because they were just walking all over the place. And I said, well, let's just give them a consequence. Let's have them, give them a boundary that if they don't do it, we're going to have to move to a place where there's less cryptobiotic soil, because it's not their job to take care of you. It's not their job to adhere to your value system. I talk about this example where Billy says to Johnny, this is of course a generic Billy and Johnny, Johnny's not helping with the chores in the morning, and Billy's getting frustrated. So Billy calls a standing group, a circle group, and gives Johnny an effective, assertive I feel statement. And then Johnny maybe even reflects it, listens well, and parrots it back using the listening skills that we teach in the program. And then oftentimes Johnny will turn to us, Billy will turn to us after all this and say, but nothing's going to change. Johnny's not going to do anything differently. And we say, maybe not. And then Billy says, so why am I learning the I feel statement? And our question is, good question. Our answer is, good question. Why are you? You're doing it for ownership. You're doing it for clarity. You're doing it for intrapsychic differentiation and awareness. You're doing it to take back your choice, to own your own interpretation in the process. I talk about this idea that it's not about changing behavior. It's one of the most common mistakes that people and parents make, is they try to change behavior using emotion. I tell the story of the eating disorder case and the mother who, after I suggested some healthy boundaries and limits in the home, she said, Brad, you don't understand. Eating disorders are about control. They've been to tons of treatment before me. Eating disorders are about control. And I said, I think these are just boundaries, healthy boundaries. I said, I think the control is when you tell your daughter that she's disgusting. When you tell her that no man is ever going to love her unless she fixes this eating disorder disease, or that you would never do this to your mother. That's controlling. But setting up healthy boundaries and limits around the house that provides safety, that's just healthy self-care. So remember, like this cartoon that I have printed here shows, it's not about telling children how we feel to get them to do what we want them to do. Shows the two parents walking into the young boy's room, a child psychology book behind their back, and the father saying to the young man, don't you realize, Jason, when you throw your furniture out the window and tie your sister to a tree, you make mommy and daddy very sad. That's not how it works. In conclusion, I end with this idea of differentiation, of separation, redefining intimacy as closeness with perspective, with an ability to remain separate at the same time. That fusion or enmeshment is not loving too much, it's really abandonment. Because in fusion or enmeshment, the child is altogether lost in the equation. One of my favorite poems or quotes by Khalil Gibran speaks of this. And if you can, I know you're sitting at your computer, but maybe you can just do what I used to ask them to do. Just sit with your eyes closed for a moment. Let me read this to you. And a woman who held a babe against her bosom said, speak to us of children. And he said, they are the sons and daughters of life longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your thoughts. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. For even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. Welcome to Evoke. All right, I'm happy to take any questions. Don't we want to help them navigate through the situation that they have encountered? How do I not give them help with a solution or suggestion? My experience is they don't typically want to. It's just like the couples commonly complain that one person comes home from work or from somewhere complaining about something that happened, and the other person gives them solutions. And oftentimes the person is not going to say something like, well, thank you, I hadn't thought of that, or I'm glad for your suggestions. They say, can't you just listen to me? So no, they typically don't want. There is a time and place for that, but it comes in a nest of empathy after a lot of listening. In my book, I talk about, you can ask somebody, what can I do for you? What do you need from me? When somebody shares something with you. That sounds so hard, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? You develop that culture in your family that before you assume you know what they want. See, the problem about that idea about fixing it or offering a solution is you have a dog in the fight. Right? You have a desire, a parental urge that we all have to alleviate your child's suffering, their pain. And so that's what gets felt by them, is that you need it to go away. So no, our experience in family therapy, in couples therapy, is that most often people just want to be heard. Then they can find their own solutions. And when they're responded to with empathy, understanding, they often will become their best resource. And they might even follow up with, what have you tried? But when we come in with the truth as experts, it sends them a message that, first of all, don't feel what you're feeling, or this is so simple. And it's not simple. Oftentimes they'll argue, we'll get into an argument, and we won't even know why we're arguing because we think I was just trying to be helpful. So pausing and asking questions, but our experience has told us that no, it doesn't necessarily mean that they want help, at least not the first response, they just want to be heard. And you'll know that, you'll recognize that, because after you offer ideas or suggestions, you end up in an argument, or they end up shooting down all your suggestions, because what they're saying to you is, it's not that easy. Just hear me. And they can't voice that, they can't articulate that. So I'm kind of doing that for them here. After a full year in treatment, next parent says, I'm preparing for my son's homecoming and working on the aftercare plan. He was 12 weeks at Evoke last summer, 8 months at a therapeutic boarding school, and today he checked back into Entrada to finish his year of internal work. My biggest stress has been the debate about how long should we ask him to be sober after he comes home. Our son wants to use weed. He wants weed back into his life. And his desire for independence and having his own life, his own way, is now stronger than it ever was. He's 16. Suddenly I'm feeling relief at the thought of telling him, I would prefer if you choose to be sober for a while, but I will let you choose. I feel this attitude will empower this stubborn young man, plus play a foundation for a new trusting relationship, and increase the likelihood that will make responsible choices because he will not be controlled. After a full year in treatment, he's sick of being told what to do and what not to do. I feel me giving him a choice about what to do. I can't answer how long. I can tell you that you get to decide. You get to decide what you're comfortable with having in your home. And if he wants to live somewhere else, as a young person, then treatment is one of the options. If he's an adult, then he can move out. But you get to decide. It's not about telling him, you don't set the boundary because you're saying you can't use. This is the most important distinction in this question. You don't set the boundary saying you can't use. You set the boundary by saying, I'm not comfortable with this in my house. I can't control whether you're going to use. In fact, there's a chance that the minute you turn 18, move out, whatever, you get independent, you're going to go crazy with use. You're going to figure it out if that works for you. That's not my job. It's not my job to figure out if you're an addict, if you can use recreationally, in moderation. That's not my job. My job is to take care of me and my space and what I'm okay with. You can hate me. You can think I'm wrong, I'm the devil, I'm an idiot, whatever. You get to decide that. That I'll honor. That I'll let you have. But I get to decide what's in my space in my life. And then you get to decide what you do with that. If you say we should not tell our children how the behavior makes us feel, then why are we asked to do this in the hope? And it's called the Hopes and Intentions letter now. That's one of the reasons why we changed it. But let me in the old webinar where I talked about the impact letter before we just changed it to the Hopes and Intentions letter, I was very clear about the fact that you share that, but not as a point of impetus, not as the reason for change. You just own it. You talk about it. How you're feeling. But that's not what we don't want our children to change because we're upset with them or it upsets us. I bet you everybody on this webinar can think of one example for themselves or their children where there was something that you have done that your parents weren't happy about. I use the example of religion. My mother is of a certain religion, and it breaks her heart that I'm not a part of that. But no matter how much it breaks her heart, no matter how much she worries about my eternal salvation, I'm not going to join her religion for that reason. So parental upsetness is not an effective long-term source of what's right and wrong. It's just not. Yes, I'm going to show up. in the New Hopes and Intentions letter, I simply say it this way. This is the basic outline, and of course, there's lots of details to it. But we love you. We're worried about you. See, we're worried about you. You say that. We love you and we're worried about you. And we don't think that you're okay, or things aren't going okay. And we don't think we can give you what you need. So we're sending you to a vote. And we hope you can get it there. That's in essence what it is. So yes, our worry and our concern informs us. That's important. And it's okay to talk about it. I didn't say don't do it. I said more and more and more. I'm reluctant to encourage that because parents say, I'm upset, I'm hurt, I'm worried, I'm scared, I'm terrified, I'm miserable. Will you stop doing it so that I'm okay? So it's not a black and white binary. I'm just warning against the most common use of the expressed feelings from parents to children. And another way that you can talk about is you can say, look, I'm upset, I'm triggered right now, but I'm, like I said earlier, I'm going to go take care of this. Like, this is what I'm going to do for me. And sometimes that includes a boundary. Like, I'm not going to let you borrow the car next time then. That's what I'm going to do to take care of myself. You take care of yourself so they don't have to. Last question. Oh, this is from a poem. Somebody wants me to read this poem. It's called Lost. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must. I need my glasses. Going such small print. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger. Must ask permission to know it and be known. The force breathes. Listen, it answers. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, staying here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. By David Wagoner. The shift is from the right path to what is. The shift is that it'll be what it'll be. Right? And that we start to have a greater capacity to hold on to whatever is happening to us and to our children. And in that doing, we help and encourage healing. Thank you for that. Sorry, I had a hard time reading it. I'll have to have my reading glasses at the computer nowadays more often. All right, folks, I'll go over some upcoming events, and then if there are any last questions, I'll get to those. We want all current parents, we ask all current parents to attend 6 12-step support groups. Either Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Nar-Anon, Alatinas for Teenagers. We ask you all to attend 6. Even if nothing else, you know what it's like to have to walk into a meeting. You have greater empathy for your child and what is being asked of them here. You can also go to NAMI.org, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and get resources, classes, and support in your local communities. Follow us on social media. All of these webinars are on podcasts. So if you go to the podcast app on an iOS device, that is an Apple device, and search Evoke Therapy Programs, you can download or listen to any of these webinars. If you have an Android device, you go to the App Store there and download the SoundCloud app, and then in the SoundCloud app, you search Evoke Therapy Programs. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram for inspiring stories and pictures and stories from the field. On Facebook, same thing, Evoke Therapy Programs, inspirational stories, quotes, articles, links to the blogs, announcements for upcoming meetings and events. You can go to the Second Nature Alumni Foundation on Facebook. It's an organization of alumni families to help people who can't afford treatment. You can also go to our blog on our Evoke Therapy website, and we post a couple of blogs a week. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, of course, is available on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. You can also get an audio version. If you go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page, part of the Amazon Smiles program, you buy the recommended books for parents there, then you also get, you're giving a percentage of the proceeds to the charity for people who can't afford therapy. Upcoming parent support groups, be in New York next week, June 7th, at CUNY again, room 9206, 6:30 to 8:30. Southern California on Sunday, so you can miss traffic, Sunday, June 11th, there's a potluck from 4 to 5, and from 5 to 7 is the parent meeting that I'll be running. And then in the Bay Area the following day at San Mateo, we're going to mix it up between the Marin area and the other side of the bay to give everybody equal opportunity. You can email Andrea at evoketherapy.com to find out more information, or to RSVP. We want all parents to go to the workshop if they can. The next one is in Cascades. These are phenomenal. Ask your therapist about them. In addition, these workshops can be combined with a field visit. So it's experiential, multifamily, and can be a part of a field visit. The next one is in Cascades in our Bend program, June 10th and 11th. If you want to do deeper work, we have some upcoming. Actually, some of these events, we're going to do a couple of these up in Toronto this year. So we have a lot of parents from Toronto, and we've been asked to come up there. We'll do a couple of these up. I'll announce that next week. Some of them will be in Utah. We either do them at Park City in a cabin, out in the field at the Oasis, or we can do them remotely. And in this case, we're going to do a couple of these in Toronto. I think July and August are going to be in Toronto. You can also do private family intensives or pursuits programs. If you want to know more about that, email intensives@evoketherapy.com. Our pursuits programs include high adventure, fun activities all around the globe. Are there any other questions? I just want to say, one parent says, no matter where I am on this journey, every webinar is helpful. After several therapeutic placements in boarding school, my son graduates as a high school senior. Other than my therapist and some groups, what webinars would you suggest? Transitions, relapse, regression? It's time to put what I've learned into practice. Sorry, it's time for what I've given myself self-grace, as I know it can become messy. I mean, I think you have an idea. The one on relapse and regression and transitions are important. I think there's one called Coming Home after Evoke. That can be helpful. All of you, I don't know if you know this, but you have a lifetime access to these webinars. If you don't have your login, you can get your login. Email me or webinar@evoketherapy.com, and then we can get you your login. You go to the website. You can use the search category. You can use search by keyword or time frame, or even just text, and you can find webinars that talk about various things. So I think you're right on track. Congratulations to your son, and I'm happy for you too. And then yeah, you're on the right track. Absolutely. Keep up the good work. All right, folks, going to be talking about manipulation later this week and projective identification. The webinar is titled Things Your Children Don't Want You to Know. It'll be Thursday, June 1st, 2 days from now at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. I hope these points of contact are helpful. Thank you on behalf of your children for joining us tonight and making your life your project. Have a great couple of days. I'll talk to you in 48 hours. Bye-bye.